Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and this can be my review for Turn, Season 1, Episode 6, Mr. Culpeper. And this episode was fantastic, as usual. I was really looking forward to this episode because of the last episode with George Washington being introduced, I thought that was a great ending. Really looking forward to seeing where it went from there, and it definitely did not disappoint. I thought this was a really good episode. I just thought it was a very good episode. Probably the best episode of the season, in my opinion. I definitely enjoyed it a lot. And especially the ending of this episode, I'm really interested in seeing where that's going to go. The other thing I like about this episode was that this really was not an episode where there was, like, a whole bunch of things going on. It was more, there were a lot of things going on, but it all had to do with Abe and Washington. I really like that, because Washington's been introduced, he's kind of made the show better. So, let's just get to this episode. So, we see this unidentified man, he's sitting at a desk, and he's writing on a leaf of paper, Scenario 37, Agent to Agent Transfer. And in an imagined scenario, Abe enters a British officer's retreat. An agent disguised as a British officer furtively hands a hard-boiled egg to Abe, and Abe slips the egg into a full basket of eggs. A redcoat abruptly stops him, demands to buy an egg, grabs the basket, some of the eggs drop to the ground, crack, and including Abe's egg. Spying a secret message written on the hard-boiled egg, the soldiers seize Abe, and Abe is killed on the struggle. So, obviously we know it's a fantasy. And the unidentified man crumbles the paper, and he says, try again. So then in a field, British and American soldiers are peacefully exchanging POWs. The group of redcoat POWs includes Simcoe. Yes, Simcoe is back in this episode. Surprisingly, there was a handful of characters in this episode that were not in it. I mean, I think this was the first episode. There was almost like 5 characters that were not in this episode. And, you know what, I didn't have a problem with that because this episode was fantastic. Because of that, I didn't have a problem with them not being in it. But there's no Caleb in this episode, which I was surprised about. But basically, Simcoe, he is injured now, so he's limping and everything, and he's limping toward a waiting carriage, and at his Morristown headquarters, we then see George Washington dictating a letter to General Howe, indicating the barbaric treatment of continental prisoners aboard the prison ships in New York Harbor, He's talking about the slaves and everything, and, George Washington, he basically says, slavery is what it is, there's something they can do about it. Again, they don't think there's anything they can do about slavery. So, Ben and General Scott are awaiting Washington. Scott looks forward to hearing how Washington will punish Ben for insubordination. Washington arrives. Together they watch a soldier get hanged for robbery, making clear that Washington does not suffer rule breakers, Basically, Washington is one of those people where you break the rules, you die. And this really scares Ben because he knows that he broke a rule, and he's very worried of what Washington is going to do to him. He doesn't know if he's going to, if he's going to get hurt or something. He's really worried at what Washington's going to do. So, Washington then arrives, introduces Ben Scott to the unidentified man who was writing the spy scenarios. We then find out who that man was, and we get introduced to a new character in this episode. That new character is Nathaniel Sackett, who is of the committee to detect and defeat conspiracies against America. So Sackett praises the accuracy of Abe's intelligence. Washington asks if such intelligence can be gathered again. Basically, that's the man who was writing all those letters. So, we then see Abe, he's driving a horse-drawn cart, and he pulls up to a Long Island checkpoint, tells a British officer that he's delivering hogs to Colonel Cook at the commissary, and the officer waves him through, but he warns him that because of the recent rebel victories, other checkpoint officers may be wary of lone travelers. So, back at Washington headquarters, Scott insists that intelligence should only be gathered by trained soldiers. Sackett disagrees, believing civilians make more discreet spies, and Washington orders Scott, Sackett, and Ben to explore the viability of Ben's spy chain idea and come back to him with a recommendation. Because they're just trying to figure out who would make a good spy, and, I think Washington kind of thinks that Ben could be a good spy at this point. So, As he travels through a woodland stretch between checkpoints, Abe passes a single redcoat walking down the road, and hearing what sounds like gunfire, Abe leaps from his seat, takes cover from behind the cart, and the redcoat says, "Don't worry, I got you." And as he points his gun at Abe, the soldier pistol whips Abe, tosses him in the back of the cart, hijacks it, and as they trot away, they pass the source of the gunfire sounds, explode casks of gunpowder in a small campfire. For most of the episode, Abe is captured at this point, so it's kind of intense there. So I definitely found that, to be interesting. But Abigail, then we see the slaves, and basically Abigail sang the table at John Andre's residence. We're really trying to figure out where Abigail and Jordan were going, and we get to see where they go in this episode. So Abigail sang the table at John Andre's residence. Andre wraps his arms around her to demonstrate European table setting and eating customs. The former POV, again, he doesn't realize that she's actually really smart. He doesn't realize that. The former POWs arrive at Andre's house guest, and Abigail holds her breath as she recognizes Simcoe among them. She doesn't really want to see Simcoe because he's the one who's okay with slavery and everything. And Andre asks Abigail to show the men to their rooms. And then we see what Jordan's doing. In New York, Jordan and other black prisoners are, Jordan has it worse. Abigail is basically just a house slave. Jordan has it a lot worse. He is he is not doing well at all, because he's racking up debris from a large fire at the Holy Ground brothel. Titus and Barney, both Queens Rangers and free blacks, stroll up. Liberty never smelled so sweet. Titus says as he kicks Jordan's pile of debris over. When Jordan confronts him, Titus punches him in the face. Jordan snaps his rake into two, fighting six, and the three square off. So you can definitely see that they're all pissed off at this whole slavery thing. Jordan briefly holds his own with some exotic fight moves, but as Titus and Barney gain the upper hand, a sharp whistle from Robert Rogers interrupts the brawl. Rogers questions Jordan about his fighting technique, and Jordan says he trained as a Maasai warrior. And Rogers offers to set up a one-on-one fight between Titus and Jordan that the men can bet on. So that was interesting. So then Ben describes his spying methods to Sackett, and he's shocked to learn that Ben hasn't been using dead drops or encryptation, and Sackett explains that confidential agents should be paid from a secret budget unknown to Congress, and Scott refuses to sign off on the spy chain method. So now we get to see who actually took Abe. He is being interrogated by this guy, Cyrus, who actually turns out to be a lone wolf continental soldier. He's not a redcoat, and I definitely thought that was very interesting. Cyrus, though, he is grilling Abe for details. Like, he is saying all this shit to him like you're a terrible person. Like, basically just insulting him so much that he will give him the details. And I thought that was definitely really interesting. And, Abe insists that he's actually a continental spy, and Cyrus doesn't believe him. He has to pretend to be a spy. So, Cyrus doesn't believe him at this point. So outside headquarters, Sackett tells Ben that Abe needs an alias to correspond with other agents. He needs to find a way to blend in. And Ben says Abe will quit it forced to work with strangers. Sackett hands Ben an egg that he's hard-boiled, then written on an alum with vinegar. Ben cracks it open, finds the message, now invisible on the eggshell, is legible on the surface of the egg. And, Andre starts to interview one of the former POWs, Lieutenant Terrace, who, about his time in captivity. Terrence is in fact an agent from one of Sackett's scenarios. He is also one of Washington's spies, so this is really interesting. He has to cover up the fact that he's one of Washington's spies. And then the next interview, Andre next interviews Simcoe, who calls Setauket, a pit and badmouths Major Hewlett, and who's not in the episode also. Hewlett's not in the episode, Caleb's not in the episode, Richard's not in the episode, Anna's not in the episode, and Mary's not in the episode. So a lot of people not in this episode, and I was fine with that. I didn't have a problem with them not being in this episode, because I just think this whole show's gotten stronger, ever since I've introduced the slaves and George Washington. Simcoe said he'd like to return the woman he met in Setauket, and Abigail eavesdrops as she delivers drinks. So in the woods, Cyrus demands Abe tells him why, if he's such a patriot, he didn't join the militia. Because you can't win. That's what he said. All he says, because you can't win. And Cyrus begins to have an emotional breakdown and insists Abe fight him for the ribbon and papers that will allow Abe to get to New York. Prove you're worth more. And as they struggle, they're interrupted when a small group of redcoats discovers Abe's wagon. Cyrus attempts to flee, but is quickly surrounded. Cyrus rushes the redcoats, and they shoot Cyrus. So Cyrus is now dead. So I thought that was pretty big. So Andre entertains the POWs at dinner, and as Andre proposes a toast, Terrence incorrectly recites his regiment's motto. Apparently, Simcoe draws a knife, stabs Terrence through the neck, and declares Terrence a liar and likely spy, and he says, "I know that." Andre screams, seething with anger. Andre says he planned to try to turn Terrence into a double agent, and that was really big there. Because Abigail's just standing just outside the dining room, and he's listening in, so, I mean, Simcoe's looking at Simcoe is, you know, Andre's looking at Simcoe like, "What'd you just do?" And, you know, Simcoe's basically saying, "Well, I killed him." And, you know, Andre's like, "Well, you didn't have to do that." And clearly we're going to have a problem here. So I kind of like this friction between Andre and Simcoe. I do like where that's going. However, my favorite part of the episode is probably these last few scenes with Washington. Because Washington reconvenes with Ben, Second, and Scott. Scott insists on continuing to use traditional Renaissance methods. Ben disagrees, tells Washington that his spy chain will work, but only with mutual trust, which they currently are lacking. They don't have any mutual trust at this point. So he asks how Washington obtained Abe's name. Washington asks to speak with Ben alone. And Jordan and Titus fight on the stage. The crowd cheers as Jordan uses his Messiah moves to win the fight, and afterwards Rogers welcomes Jordan into the Queen's Rangers. So Jordan won the fight, and as Jordan walks away, Awosis pushes throughout the crowd, speaking in Abenaki, which I guess is some sort of a native slave language, I don't really know, but he tells Rogers that a man who knows Ben has come forward and reports that Ben's brother Samuel is being held off on board the prison ship New Jersey. So that's definitely very interesting. I'm interested in seeing where that's going to go, and that's pretty interesting. Now, at the very end of the episode, we see Washington finally tells Ben that he obtained Abe's name from one of his spies, Nathan Hale, who was Ben's friend at Yale and recently hanged by the British. So he wants Abe, but, you know, none of the British, they don't all know that he's dead, so he wants Abe to be Mr. Culpeper. That's who he wants him to be. He wants to be, that's his new alias, Mr. Culpeper, and that is why this episode's called Mr. Culpeper, and I thought that was fantastic with that at the end. I thought that was really, really good because, honestly, the one thing I've been complaining about the show is that we really have not been seeing Abe spy, and finally, we're going to get to see him spy, and, Abe then tells one of the Redcoats that Cyrus was wearing Abe's clothes because he was planning on assuming Abe's identity and escaping into the city. The Redcoat tells Abe that lone travelers are no longer being allowed into New York and that Abe cannot continue on alone. So, Abigail's cleaning up Terrence's blood. She mentions her son's birthday to Andre, showing kindness in the wake of the murder. Andre offers to send a gift via special courier if Abigail picks it out. So, we didn't see her son in this episode, which, you know, because we didn't see Anna in this episode, so I was surprised we didn't get to see that, but I do think we are going to see her son and Anna again. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. You can definitely see, though, that Abigail does have it better than Jordan, even though Jordan, you know, they depicted the more negative aspects of slavery in this episode, which I thought was interesting, and that was definitely very well done. The very last scene in this episode, I loved. I love the last scene in this episode because it's going to be amazing, because after assigning Scott to the war front, Washington promotes Ben to Major. He decides to promote him to Major because he thinks he will be the best one to help him get this new identity for Abe. He wants him to do that, and he puts him in charge of the intelligence branch, and Washington asks Ben to pick a first name for Mr. Culpeper, and Ben decides to choose Samuel, and that's how the episode ends. So, now Abe has his new alias. His new alias is Samuel Culpeper. So it's gonna be very interesting to see him, sort of be a spy with this new alias. You know, it's gonna be a lot like the Americans because now they have a different sort of alias. Even though the Americans is the 80s and this is the 1700s, it's going to be a little bit like that because now he is someone completely different, and it's gonna be interesting to see what happens there. And in the promo, you see a scene where they say, Abraham Woodhull is dead. Forget about him. You now have to go by, Samuel Culpeper at all times. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see where that's going to go. So that was very interesting. Also, there's definitely going to be a lot of friction between Simcoe and John Andre. You can see in this episode, Simcoe is kind of the guy that just gets things done without thinking through. And John Andre kind of seems like the guy who actually does care a little bit about the slaves, because he does want to help Abigail. He does want to give her son a present, because he's being kind and everything. So I definitely thought that was interesting. And also Jordan, I don't know exactly where that's going to go. That's definitely going to be interesting to see. But this episode, again, was really, really amazing. I definitely really loved it. By far the best episode of the season, in my opinion, because now, finally, we have an alias for Abe, and I'm very excited to see what that alias is. It's going to be very cool to see that, and it's definitely going to be very cool. And, the biggest part of this episode is that Ben's brother, Samuel, is being held on board the prison ship New Jersey. So, I mean, that's a pretty big thing, because now, basically, Abe's called Samuel, so that's going to be interesting to see what happens. And now we know why Ben wants to call him Samuel, because, that's his brother, and that's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I'm wondering if we are going to meet the actual Samuel Talmadge, in the show. That's going to be interesting to see if we do. And I do kind of thinking, since we only have 4 episodes left of this season, I think this show is probably going to end with them all going to New York. I kind of think that's where they're setting it up. I don't really know. But that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for Mad Men. So, see you then. Bye.